Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. Now, as many of you will know, I recently drove up all the way from Hoedspruit here in South Africa to Mana National Park in the north of Zimbabwe to go and camp along the Zambezi River at Nyamepi campsite. And I know exactly how daunting it can be to put a trip like that together. So in this video, I thought what I would do is I'll try and answer all the questions I had before I left. But before I do so, make sure to go and check out my main Mana video, which is also here on the channel, and it basically captures the whole adventure that we had. So I'll link to that at the end of this video. Now, the first thing that I think you should do before you even start planning your trip is go and join the Friends of Mana Facebook group. It's a massive community of people that have been to Mana and that loves the place, and you can ask any questions you have about the park there and also get some great photos and videos of what it looks like at certain times of the year. And that's basically the first thing that I want to talk about is when is the best time of the year to go to Mana? And I've been there in their summer and I saw virtually nothing. And it was also very, very difficult to drive around because it was extremely wet. And that was in March. So the tip basically is make sure that you go during the dry season. So I would say anything from the beginning of July until the end of October. That'll be the driest period in Mana. And that means that there's going to be a lot of action along the river and those big pools. Remember, Mana means 4 pools in the local Shona language, and that refers to places like Long Pool and other pools in the area that I'll speak about a little bit later. And in the dry season, there'll be a lot of action around there. So avoid anything from, I would say, November to June, because there's a chance that it's going to be too wet. And in the dry season specifically, if you don't like the heat, stay away in September and October because it gets very, very, very hot. So I would say then maybe aim for something like late July or somewhere in August. Now, timing-wise, it's also important to think about the school holidays, not only the South African school holidays, but also the Zimbabwe school holidays. So go online, check when those dates are, and avoid those school holidays if you don't want to be in a campsite that's absolutely packed. And then this year, we had another little unexpected issue where we arrived at Nyamepi outside of the school holiday, but it was the Zimparks annual game count in Mana. And that's where basically volunteers from all over the country arrives there, and they all walk in the park to count the animals. And that meant that the campsite was even overbooked. It was chock and block full with hundreds of people. Now, I'm not 100% sure how you find out exactly when those dates are, because it might vary from year to year. But I would suggest that if you book through an agency, or even if you book through Zimparks, just ask there for them to please find out when the game count is and to not book the dates over that time. So now the next question is, how do you make your booking? So if you are just going to camp at Nyamepi or Chitaki Springs or Mucheni or one of the other campsites there, and you are fully kitted like I am with your 4x4, and you basically just want to book your campsite, you've got to do it through Zimparks specifically. And I'll drop their email in the video description. If, however, you don't have a fully kitted 4x4 and you need the 4x4, you want to book your campsites, and perhaps you want to stay at some lodges as well, and you just don't know where to start, go and check out a company called Drive Botswana. They're basically a company that can put the trip together for you from start to finish. So they'll rent a 4x4 that's fully kitted, they'll book your campsites, they'll book activities and lodges if you need, and they'll also give you all the information you need about the trip up, like border crossings, where to shop, where to fill up, and even things to see along the route. And they've got these lovely little handbooks that they will send you as well. And that's got information about all the towns and maps of the reserves and a lot of other handy information. And the cool thing about Drive Botswana, you might think, why is it called Drive Botswana if you want to go to Zimbabwe? They cover different Southern African countries. So you can book a trip to Botswana, to Namibia, to Zimbabwe, to South Africa or Malawi, or a trip to all those different countries. So if you want to incorporate Mana in a larger trip, Drive Botswana can still help you with that. So I'll also add that link in the video description. So now the next question is, what border post should you use to go to Mana? Now, I'm sure a lot of you that are watching will start in Gauteng, maybe in Johannesburg or Pretoria. Maybe some of you will be coming from other parts of Southern Africa. But essentially, South Africans always ask, should I just go through Beitbridge, or should I maybe go through Botswana, going through Groblersbrug and then Plumtree up? Now, the reason people wonder about that is because Beitbridge has had this reputation as being a place where you queue for very long, and that there always used to be a lot of corruption as well. Now, I'm happy to announce that my brother went through there recently, and it was very smooth sailing. So you can definitely go through Beitbridge, and if you're lucky, you could go through there very quickly. And that's your shortest route from Gauteng, driving up all the way to Messina, cross at Beitbridge, and then through Harare all the way up to Mana Pools. That'll be the shortest route. We, however, were a little bit scared to go through Beitbridge, so we decided to cross into Botswana at Stopover border post. It's a little bit smaller than Groblersbrug and Martinsdrift, and that means a slightly quicker crossing, but it was a little bit of a detour to get to Stopover, and then also a longer drive through Botswana. So we went from Hoedspruit and our friends from Johannesburg to Stopover, crossed there, drove all the way to Francistown, where we stayed at Woodland Stopover. Then the next day we crossed into Zimbabwe at Plumtree, which was very quick and easy. And then we stopped in Bulawayo, slept there to do our shopping. Because of course, if you go through Botswana, you cannot take any meat, dairy, fruit and veg through. That means you have to do your shopping along the way. Whereas if you go through Beitbridge, they don't have those restrictions, and that means you can shop in South Africa. So that's a little bit of an advantage of going through Beitbridge. And I'm happy to say that you can now get most of your groceries, good quality groceries, in Zimbabwe specifically, especially in the larger towns and cities. So from Bulawayo, we went up all the way to Chinhoyi. So even if you go through Beitbridge and drive via Harare, you'll also end up going to Chinhoyi. Chinhoyi is basically the last big town where you can do shopping, fill up, and get everything you need before you do the last stretch to Mana Pools specifically. So whichever route you decide to go, I would say make sure that you sleep in Chinhoyi the night before you go through to Mana Pools. And the reason for that is because the road north of Chinhoyi to Mana Pools is absolutely horrendous. And I'll explain in a second why. In Chinhoyi, I strongly suggest that you stay at Msasa Guest House, which I'll link to below. We found it extremely comfortable, reasonably priced, and we were also able to get water there to fill up our water tanks. It's also very close to Pick n Pay, where you can do your last bit of grocery shopping. And then just down the road is a lovely place to eat called the Open House Cafe. We got to Chinhoyi quite early, so we also went to see the Chinhoyi Caves, and I must admit it absolutely blew me away, and I can highly recommend that you visit that as well. Now, the following morning, you've got to tackle the road from Chinhoyi to Mana Pools, and there's a few places along the way that I recommend you stop. I recommend that you leave Chinhoyi nice and early, and then your first stop will be just north of town at the Lion's Den Butchery. Now here you can pre-order meat, which they'll then pack and freeze for you. The list of what they have to sell is available online. So we just had a look through that and then sent them an email the week before to place our orders. Now about 90 kilometers north of Chinhoyi is the town of Karoi, which is the last big filling station where you can fill up with clean fuel. So I highly recommend that you do that. And that road is still pretty decent. Just make sure that in Karoi you park in a parking spot specifically, because apparently the police there will quickly fine you if you just pull over on the side of the road. North of Karoi, unfortunately, the road becomes horrendous. It's full of potholes and somewhere almost non-existent, and it's full of trucks that drive really, really badly. So for this stretch, you have to drive super slowly, very carefully, and just don't be in a rush at all. About 20 kilometers north of Karoi, there's a little farm stall called The Farmer's Wife, which is a good place to stop to have a quick bite and get another coffee. And there's also a few basics like drinks and fresh bread and stuff that you could buy for Mana Pools. From there, it's 70 kilometers on that horrible road to the village of Makuti, where there's a tiny little filling station where you can top up with the last little bit of fuel. But I wouldn't top up my whole tank there because there is a risk that the fuel might be a little bit dirty. About 16 kilometers north of Makuti is the Marangoro Parks offices, where you have to stop before you go to Mana Pools to show them your booking, and they will then issue you with a permit. You then take that permit with you, drive down the escarpment to the first boom gate. So that's where you turn off that tar road and basically get to the edge of the park. At the boom gate, they'll check the permit and they'll also ask you whether or not you have any fruits with you, because you're not allowed to take any fruit into the park. There's also a chance that they might spray you for tsetse flies. There are often lots of tsetse flies around in monopools, so try and avoid the colors blue and black, which is what they're attracted to, and also make sure to carry some insect repellent with you. I have found that things like Peaceful Sleep or Tabot that you use for mosquitoes don't work particularly well for tsetse flies, but this year we tried something called shoe fly, which is something to keep flies off dogs, cats and horses, and that worked very well for us. Now, from that first boom gate where you've turned off the tar road onto the gravel road, the road becomes very corrugated, and it's approximately 50 kilometers to get to Chitaki Springs and approximately 80 kilometers to get to Nyamepi on the Zambezi River. And this is where I would then deflate my tires to about 1.8 bar just to give you a little bit more of a comfortable ride. So to give you an idea, it took us a full 8 hours to get from Chinhoyi to Nyamepi on the Zambezi River. It's a lot longer than a lot of people think. But granted, we did stop at Lion's Den, the Farmer's Wife, and then obviously at the park's offices as well. I'll talk about camping at Chitaki Springs right at the end, but let's start with Nyamepi. If you're self-driving to Nyamepi campsite, you've got to stop at the Nyamepi offices close to the campsite itself first, and there you'll then show them your permit, and then you'll pay a daily conservation fee per person, as well as a vehicle fee for your time that you'll spend in monopools. The price will vary depending on whether you are a local, whether you're a SADC member, or an international traveler. You can also buy a fishing permit there, as well as wood that's sold by the big bundle. Now, a lot of people wonder about walking in monopools, and you definitely are allowed to walk yourself in monopools without a guide. So if you want to walk far away from your car, in other words, you see an elephant in the distance and you want to walk 100, 200 meters or even further, you have to pay for a walking permit at reception. And the time that we were there now, it was $10 per person per day. So what we did the day that we arrived there is we paid for a walking permit for each person, and then at least we had that if we needed it out on drive. If you just want to get out of your car to get a little bit of a different angle, but you're not going to walk further than 10 meters away from your car, you don't need to pay for that permit. You can also pay for a guided walk, and we did that one morning and we paid $10 per person per hour. So we walked for 3 hours for $30, which I thought was quite reasonable. And that was a really nice way to get a lot of information about the park and for the guide to actually take us to some very special spots. So I can highly recommend that as well. If you're going to go walking in monopools, make sure to bring a very comfortable pair of shoes with. In my case, I brought my Gym Green African Rangers, which are very comfortable hiking boots, and I'll link to those in the video description as well. There's also a small gift shop at reception, and just behind it at the workshop is a small canteen where you can buy cold drinks, including alcohol, as well as some bottled water. So if you don't want to drink the water at Nyamepi itself, which I'll speak about in a second, rather buy 5 or 10 liters of still water at the Pick and Pay in Chinhoyi and bring those with rather than buying it at the canteen. There's also Wi-Fi at the reception. From reception, it's about a 5-minute drive to get to Nyamepi campsite itself. It's a public campsite and it is massive. It stretches for a couple of 100 meters right on the bank of the Zambezi River. Now there's approximately 30 stands to choose from. And when you make your booking, you have to decide whether or not you want to stay on the river itself or a little bit further away from the river. And that's quite a significant price difference. When we booked now in 2024, it was $100 per stand for 6 people away from the river and $150 per stand for 6 people on the river. You can also then pay an additional fee if you're more than 6 people on the stand. Now, I did a long walk through the campsite to try and choose the best stands, and I must be honest with you, I found it really difficult to decide which ones are best because they had good and bad qualities. Some of them, for instance, have beautiful big trees, but the little braai block is far away from the tree. So your campsite and your braai area is not right next to each other. Others were very weirdly spaced where the number of the stand was between 2 large trees. So you're not even sure which tree belongs to your number. And then others, especially the ones that were a little bit further away from the river, I found that they were quite close to each other and sometimes too close to ablution blocks. So very hard and hard for me to give you good advice. But what I will say is that the stand that we had, number 16, is by far the best if you want to camp on the river. And the one next to it, number 17, is also very good. So if you have got your heart set on a big tree on the river, ask for stand number 16 or number 17. Number 1, 2, and 3 are also very nice. Nice cover, relatively exclusive, right on the river. The only thing about them that I don't like so much is that they are the closest to the Star Village. So there is an outside chance of a little bit of noise coming from that way. We didn't stay there though, so I can't say for certain whether that's an issue or not. The stands on the river further towards the east, so further away from reception, are, so I would say from number 25 further towards the right, if you look towards the river, are a lot more exposed. So the trees aren't so nice, and that's where those numbers are very weirdly placed between the trees. So personally, I would stay away from that side if you want to camp on the river. The only stand that I liked that was a little bit further away from the river, if you don't want to pay that extra fee, is number 19. Now, another tip that I can give you is that if you are scared of animals, especially at night, book a stand that's close to one of the 4 ablution blocks. They're nicely spread throughout the campsite, and there obviously are stands close to each. So I'll put up the map, have a look at it, and then book a stand that's close to one of those 4 ablution blocks. Otherwise, you're going to have to drive, because at night there are lots of hyenas, elephants, and even hippos in the campsite. But before I talk about the animals, let's quickly talk about the ablution blocks. They're definitely not in the best state. In fact, they're quite run down, if I'm being completely honest. At least they had hot water, flushing toilets, and most importantly, they were clean. And if you are lucky, you had a mirror on the wall as well. Just remember to bring your own toilet paper with. Now, between the ablution blocks and the stands are also some taps, and the water that comes out of them, I've heard mixed stories about whether or not you can drink it. Some people say that it's been treated and that you can drink it, and others say it comes straight from the Zambezi. To me, it looked very clean, but we just used that to wash our dishes. If you're a little bit worried, it's still best to bring your own drinking water with. Right, let's talk about those animals. Nyamepi is basically a place where man and beast share the campsite. It's full of animals. During the day, you'll have general game like eland and impala walk through, plenty of baboon and vervet monkeys, and then lots and lots of elephants as well. Now, baboons and monkeys are actually the biggest problem because they raid your dustbins. And in Mana pools, there's no place to drop your rubbish. You have to take everything that you bring in out again. So what I recommend you do is to bring your own rubbish bin. We brought one that we could hang up in a tree. Bring some heavy duty bin bags as well. And then if you're in the campsite, you can keep the monkeys and baboons away yourself. But during the day, if you're going to game drive, you can pay one of the ranger's wives to stay in your campsite and to keep the monkeys and baboons away. And that worked really well for us. You can basically just ask them at reception to send someone over, and then you can arrange with her then what times she must come throughout your stay. At night, however, those bags have to be put away because hyenas can get to them as well. So you can either put them on the roof rack of your car or your trailer. Don't put them in a bag on the ground because the hyenas will tear through that to get to the rubbish. So that's basically how we made sure that the baboons, monkeys, and hyenas didn't get to our rubbish. And then at the end, we basically strapped it to the roof and had to drive it back out of Mana pools. So be conscious of what you bring in so that you take away as little rubbish as possible. Having the elephants in camp was definitely an interesting experience, and I must say that 9 out of 10 of them were super relaxed. If you gave them space, they gave you space as well. Some of them were very curious and came up very close to our tents. In that case, we just stay sat or stood watching them without trying to make noise, chasing them away or running away ourselves, and we just let them go about their business. 1 or 2 of the bulls, though, were a little bit cheeky, and in that case, we just took a step back and stood behind our vehicles. And once or twice, we did have to make a little bit of a noise to shoo them away. But when they become the biggest problem is when people bring in fruit. So don't bring any fresh fruit in, or even anything that's made with fruit. So that includes a lemon meringue pie, dried fruit, just anything, fruit sticks. Keep that away, and definitely don't keep that in your car or tent, because they will flatten it or break it open. At night, give the hippos and hyenas plenty of space, and again, don't leave anything lying around that's got a meaty or bloody smell to it, because the hyenas might carry it away. Now, speaking about braais, like I mentioned, there are big braai stands for each campsite, but some of them are poorly spaced. So what we did was we made a fire on the ground and just cooked on our own grills that we took with. And then in the morning, someone came past and cleaned up all the ashes. Another very important thing to remember about all monopools campsites is that there's no power available. So you have to bring with your own solar panels and power banks and dual battery systems to make sure that you can run your fridges, charge your batteries, and all the other things that needs power. Personally, I used a Bluetti EB70 portable power bank along with a Bluetti PV200 solar panel, which work like an absolute charm. And I've done a review on both, to which I'll link in the video description. For a full list of all the gear that I packed for this monopools trip, go and check out my Zimbabwe packing list video, to which I'll also link at the end of this video. So let's talk about game drives. You're allowed to do game drives basically when it's light. So just before sunrise till just after sunset. And while we were there, that was basically from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6:30 in the afternoon. And there's plenty of beautiful, beautiful places to go and spend the morning or the afternoon. And I'm going to try and mention a few of my favorites. The first was the biggest of the 4 pools, and it's called Long Pool. It's very close to Nyamepi, probably about a 10 minutes drive just south of camp. Now, when you get there, you can either drive to a little public parking spot on the southern bank that forms a little peninsula, and that's sometimes a little bit crowded in the morning, but a great place from which to photograph the birds, both in front light or backlight. So I highly recommend that you go and spend one early morning there. The bird life is just unbelievable. The water birds include yellow-billed storks and saddle-billed storks, spoonbills, a variety of herons and egrets, lapwings, sandpipers, you name it. There were even some African skimmers skimming past us. It's definitely a place that bird watchers and photographers will love. Now, if you feel like it gets a little bit crowded for you, you can also stop a little bit closer to the campsite on the edge of the pool and then just walk down to the edge. We took our own camping chairs and coffee down and just sat there, and that'll be a little bit more secluded. But you've got to be careful there, because you might get surprised by some animals coming from the back. So just always remember to keep an eye out for things like hippos and elephants, especially hippos that have left the water and that's coming back. And never ever go close to the edge of the water, because I'm telling you, there are hundreds and hundreds of crocodiles in Long Pool. You have been warned. At the end of the day, when you're on foot in monopools, it's always just about giving the animals their space. It's also worth popping down to Long Pool in the afternoon, because very often some mammals come down to drink when it's nice and hot. Another pool worth visiting is Chinhoyi Pool, and that's about a 5 to 10 minute drive west of camp. And it's a lot smaller than Long Pool, and in this case, it was actually dry by the time we got there. But the reason why it's so nice to visit is it's located in the most beautiful anna tree forest. So if you get there and there is still water in it, which will typically be the case if you're there July, August, or September, that water might attract a lot of animals walking through those beautiful trees, and that's where you can get those quintessential monopool shots of either the golden light or that blue haze filtering through those anna trees. Another great place to photograph elephants and other mammals in between those beautiful anna trees and other big trees like sausage trees and Natal mahoganies is the little road that runs to Trikelia Viewpoint. It's a little bit further west from Chinhoyi Pool and Nyamepi campsite, and unfortunately there's no sign that shows you Trikelia Viewpoint. So you'll follow the sign that says Mana River Camp for Machaba Safaris, and then at some stage it'll split and you stay left, and that'll then take you down to the river. That stretch just have some of the most beautiful big trees and some lovely arching branches and plenty of big elephant bulls as well. And stopping next to the river at Trikelia Viewpoint itself is a great place to have your coffee stop in the morning. The river road that runs further west from Trikelia Viewpoint, past Mucheni campsites, all the way to the car park, is also great for game viewing and bird watching, and I highly recommend that you drive it a couple of times at least. Now, to the eastern side of Nyamepi is also a beautiful area to explore, quite close to camp in fact. Along the river, there's a place called Mana Mouth, which is a great place to have sundowners. In fact, it was my favorite spot for sundowners anywhere in the whole reserve. And then south of that, there's a nice network of roads that also goes through some really, really beautiful anna tree forests. We didn't see quite as much game there, but when we did come across something, it was spectacular for photography. Let's quickly talk about two specific animal species that I know most of you have thought about when you think of monopools, namely elephants and African wild dogs. There are a number of wild dog packs that use monopools, but they move around a lot. So even in a week's time, you're not guaranteed of seeing them. So what I recommend you do, when you go out on game drive, early in your stay in the park, go to reception and ask them whether they've heard any news about where the dogs have been seen recently. Because if they're in the area, give yourself a chance by going there straight away. While you're driving, you can also stop some of the lodge vehicles or other self-drivers and ask them whether they've seen wild dogs and try and get some local information to give you a better chance. We, for instance, saw the dogs on our very first afternoon after getting a tip at reception and then didn't see them again for 6 days as they went south into the Mopani Veld. If you're lucky though, the pack is spending some time around Nyamepi or along the Zambezi River and you're able to spend quality time with them on a number of different days. The great thing is that the dogs are typically very relaxed and you can get nice and close on foot. If, however, there are other people in the sighting before you arrive, make sure that you keep them in mind as well, especially to not stand directly opposite them if they're photographers. Now, when it comes to elephants, I know that a lot of you dream of photographing Boswell and other famous elephants standing on their hind legs to reach for those anna tree leaves. Now, there's a very good chance that you might see this happening because apparently there are up to 14 different elephants that do this. It's not only Boswell, but again, I would recommend that you stop some of the guides or go and ask at reception to ask whether or not someone has seen Boswell, Fred Astaire, JD, or any of the other famous elephants, so that you know where to go and look. Typically, you'll drive along and then see a number of empty cars parked along the side of the road. And then if you just look in the distance, you'll see where a group of people have gathered to photograph one of these amazing famous elephants. Just remember that a lot of these big famous elephant bulls have radio collars on. And even though it doesn't look great on photographs, it's very important to monitor their movements when they leave the park. Now, we were traveling in a group. We were 3 different vehicles, and what we found worked best when we go out on game drive is to use two-way radios, because that way we could split up and then call each other in when we find anything nice. Now, the company that we used is called IR Pope and Sons two-way radios, and they're based down in Cape Town. So I'll leave a link to their website down in the description as well. Now, these two-way radios were not only great when we did game viewing, but they were also invaluable on the long road up to and back from monopools, because it just allows you to stay awake a little bit more easily, to tell each other about cows, other animals, or potholes in the way, or to just say to the other guys, it's maybe time to stop for food, for a toilet break, or to fill up with fuel. I've already spoken a little bit about all the birds that you can spot around Longpool, but there's lots of other specials in the area to look out for as well. Things like Livingston's flycatchers and the Lillian's lovebirds. We also saw pennant-winged nightjar. So make sure that before you go to monopools, go into your bird app or bird book and check what species you haven't seen in northern Zimbabwe and make a point to look for them when you're in monopools. Now, last but not least, I quickly want to talk about the other accommodation options in monopools over and above Nyamepi campsite. So there are some other more exclusive campsites like Mucheni along the river and a few other ones that I can't remember the names of. Now, unfortunately, I didn't visit these myself, so I can't say much about what they look like. But I do know that they are a little bit more expensive than at Nyamepi. So if you're going to go for that exclusivity, you're going to have to be willing to pay for it. Chitaki Springs is a long distance away from the floodplain. So on that bumpy road that you drive in from the tar road, when you get to the second boom gate, instead of turning left to Nyamepi, you'll turn right to Chitaki Springs. And at Chitaki Springs itself, there are 3 numbered public campsites. Number 1 and 3 is along the little dry riverbed, and then number 2 is very close to the spring itself. And then there's an overflow site at the baobab trees, which is a really beautiful spot, but you've got to be a little bit careful because I have heard that it attracts a lot of bees and it has given some people some serious issues. I would recommend that you book stand number 1 or 3 along the river, not only because it has plenty of shade, but also because they're probably a little bit safer than campsite number 2, which is so close to the spring. That's the one site where animals, and especially lions, have given people some issues at night because you don't have nice visibility. It's quite dense. So I would say campsite number 2 at Chitaki is only for the bravest of people and actually can be quite dangerous. Now, all 3 of those campsites are relatively close to what's called the fig tree, which is a little public parking spot under a massive fig tree where people can park and look down at the spring itself. And that's where you very often have the interaction with buffalo and lion. The lion basically lie in wait for those buffalo to come down and drink. What I can say though is that your chances of actually seeing a big herd of buffalo at Chitaki Springs is relatively small, especially now that there are other camps in the area like the Mara camp and the Kavinga Safari camp, because they have permanent water sources as well now. So I have been to Chitaki once for 8 days and only saw 2 herds of buffalo. So there is a little bit of luck of the draw. The Chitaki Springs campsites are also almost double than what you pay on the river stands at Nyamepi, so they're terribly expensive. And I would only go there if you really, really have your heart set on seeing the buffalo at the springs itself. But generally speaking, from a game viewing experience, it's not so good because there are very few roads to drive and you cannot walk there safely on your own. If you really want to walk in that area, you would have to book a private guide to walk with you. Now let's very quickly talk about the lodge options in Mana Pools. Now the one that I like most further away from the river is called Kavinga Safari Camp, and it's got beautiful safari tents on a little ridge that looks down at a very productive waterhole. Now this waterhole has an eye-level hide next to it, and then there's another one in camp next to a little bird bath where it's not only birds but also things like elephant, lion and leopard come and drink right in front of you. They also have a very good road network, and a lot of those roads go right into beautiful white sandy riverbeds, and the area is great for lions as well. So if you're going to go to an area away from the riverbed, go and book Kavinga Safari Camp. Now on the floodplain itself, there are a number of lodges along the Zambezi River, and they'll vary in price depending on how luxurious they are. But luckily from all of them, you will be able to get to all the best places like Trakilia Viewpoint, Long Pool, and Chisasika Pool. So I would basically leave it up to your agent to make some recommendations as to which one you want to book. Please feel free to ask any questions you might still have about Mana Pools in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to go and check out my main Mana Pools video where I share our adventure with you after this one. A massive thank you also to all my patrons. These are basically people that make a small monthly donation in return for some rewards like early access to the videos or these mentions in the video. And they basically help me to run the Safari Expert YouTube channel and to do more trips like I just did to Zimbabwe. So if you enjoyed the video and you'd like to support my adventures, please go and check out the link that I've added to Patreon in the video description. Until next time.